Well, today has been dubbed Super Wednesday, and the Independent Electoral Commission, or the IEC, will oversee by-elections in 95 municipal wards in 56 municipalities across the country. More than 600,000 voters are registered to vote for this by-election. And the IEC says that today's by-elections will act as a litmus test for holding future elections. The by-elections could not be held for months, and that, of course, due to the national coronavirus lockdown. So to discuss Super Wednesday, we're joined by Mr. Mesego Shiburi, who is the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer of the IEC. Mr. Shiburi, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina.
Mr. Shiburi, let's start with yesterday. Of course, an opportunity for those who needed to cast special votes for this by-election. They had an opportunity to do so. So let's just talk about how things actually panned out. And if possible, just look at some of the numbers, the statistics with regard to the votes that were cast yesterday.
Sakina, yesterday, just under 4% of the total eligible voters in the 95 wards in which we have vacancies successfully applied for special votes. The majority of those special votes were in the province of the Northern Cape. I am happy to report that in spite of inclement weather in parts of the country, notably Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Mpumalanga, we have been able to reach the majority of all of people who had applied for special votes and who were voting in a facility or in a home outside of a voting station. Similarly, we opened a number of voting stations to enable those persons who are unable to vote today and who had applied for a special vote to vote at their voting station yesterday. We will, when we do the count today, know exactly the number of the total turnout of persons who had applied for special votes.
And of course, Mr. Shiburi, all of this taking place against a backdrop of lockdown. Even though we are on level 1, there are special protocols and precautions to be taken. Let's talk about those and how it has affected the work that the IEC normally does.
You know, there's a funny side to even a serious condition like we have now. I was told by some of our colleagues that they had some hilarious moment when we visited some members to cast special votes at home because our staff were kitted out in PPEs. Some people were reluctant to open doors. Some people literally ran away thinking that we are from the Department of Health. But those are necessary interventions that we need to do to ensure that we do not spread the virus and also that we do not expose our staff members to infection. So yesterday, we did special votes under strict protocols where people had PPEs. Today, again at the voting station, we will insist on observing social distances. We will also insist that everyone who comes into a voting station has a face covering or a mask, that we sanitize the hands of everyone on entering and leaving the station, and that inside the station, all party agents and our staff will maintain some social distancing. We will carry that also into the counting process so that in the aftermath of this by-election, it doesn't turn out to be a super spreader event, but be a super spreader for democracy.
And of course, for those who will be going out to vote today, Mr. Shiburi, what will the protocols be? Obviously, it's not going to be as you would have normally done. One thinks about things like the pens that you use. What are the processes going to be?
The processes will be intuitive. They'll be akin. If a person has voted before, the process has not changed. We've just inserted public health measures in parts of the process flow. The first one, in the queues, we insist that people maintain at least 1 meter apart in the queues. At the door of the voting station, we will sanitize the hand of the voter. When they get into the station, they must have their mask on. The only point at which we will ask them to adjust their mask is when they present their ID books so that we can confirm that the voter is indeed the person presenting the identity document. At the point where we mark the thumb of the voter, we will not use the traditional pens that we've used hitherto because those pens are used on multiple voters. For these elections, we have ink decanted into small bottles, and we will use a cotton bud applicator to apply the ink to the left thumb of the voter. Before we apply the ink, we will check for obvious residue of hand sanitizer, including any lubricants on the thumb to clear it so that the effectiveness of the ink is not vitiated. On leaving the station, a voter will also have their hands sanitized. Voters may bring their own pens, but we will sanitize the pens that we make available at the voting station. As I said, our staff members at the stations will be kitted out in appropriate PPEs, which includes face shields, face masks, and disposable hand gloves. This to protect themselves, but more importantly, to protect the voting public.
Now, given the pandemic, this is, of course, a litmus test, this particular by-election, Mr. Shiburi, for next year's local government elections. And because at this stage, you have to at least consider that we could still be in the grips of a pandemic by the time we go to the polls. So what are the sort of arrangements that you're looking at, given the size of that election as compared to this by-election that would perhaps serve as a test run?
Preparations for a general elections are already underway, and for that reason, you are correct, Sakina. We must begin to factor in things that we must do different in light of the pandemic. We have revised our bills of material to include the PPEs for use both during the registration drives as well as on the election day itself. So we're planning as though the pandemic will be a factor in next year's election, and if it dissipates, then at least we will then amend our plans at that point. We'll be ready rather than trying at the last minute to make plans. The by-election today provides us an opportunity to test readiness, but also to see the areas in which we need to occasion improvement. Certainly, beyond today, we will have debriefs to see where the measures worked and held up admirably, but more importantly, what it is that we can still further do to ensure the public safety of our staff and voters.
And then the issue of the voters' roll remains a contentious one, Mr. Shiburi. Yesterday, the EFF in the Free State, they called on the IEC to take action against what they call bogus voters' rolls in the Mangaung municipality. And the EFF, of course, alleging that some people who appeared on that voters' roll have not registered for special votes, and some names were actually fictitious. What's your response to these allegations? And also, as we wrap this interview, how up to date is the voters' roll for these by-elections?
We maintain our voters' roll regularly, and we also do so in consultation with political parties. Before these by-elections, political parties would have received at least 2 sets of the voters' roll. The voters' roll as it stood when we announced the by-election, and also a set of a voters' roll after it was certified by the Chief Electoral Officer. We maintain party liaison committees at the national, provincial, and municipal level. And if there are issues, the EFF is within their right to raise those things. We will investigate them and revert to them. Just to avoid any confusion, the voters' roll is updated only with the names of persons who are eligible to participate, i.e. they are South Africans, they are 18 years and above, and we do verification against the National Population Register. So a person presents themselves for application, we process the application, we confirm their citizenship status, and only then do we place that person on the voters' roll. Since the judgment of the Concord in Tlokwe, we also now make sure that there is a relationship between the voter's address on the voters' roll and the ward in which the voter is registered. To the extent that there's a complaint from the party, we will look at that and offer a cogent response to the party before we conclude the voting process today.
Well, Mr. Shiburi, thanks so much for that update. Mr. Mesego Shiburi from the IEC talking to us about by-elections. Today, of course, dubbed Super Wednesday because of the scale of these by-elections. 95 wards in 56 municipalities and over 600,000 voters going to the polls today. With that, let's take a quick break before the news.